This is One Soccer Today Valentine's Day edition, and on this day of love, there's no one else I'd rather celebrate and spend the time with. Not my girlfriend, not my dog, Oliver Platt and Gareth Wheeler. This is OST, and it's a big OST because
Love
we
you,
had
man.
a huge
I love you,
match
man.
last night. Mwah! Cavalry and Pumas at Estadio Olimpico Universitario, Leg 2, Round 1. Cavalry enters the match. They're up by 2-1 after the previous Thursday's marvelous performance at Starlight Stadium. We will get into that in depth. We'll also discuss a little bit of post-CPL club appearance in CCC recap. We'll work on the name. It's a little bit wordy. Some Toronto FC and then a Valentine special. Gareth Wheeler's feeling the love and he wants to share it today. A difference maker is exactly what Toronto FC is searching for. And while there are some reports out there that they have gone out and reinforced that attacking group a little bit today, and they've done some shopping, in fact, from Norway, maybe Tobias Warschewski is a player that could fit the mold if TFC had money, which they don't right now because Lorenzo Insigne absolutely refuses to leave the club. And we will argue the merits of that. But there is a new report from Tom Bogert, with additional details with a report from Neil Davidson of the Canadian Press. And the new details are that there were 3 clubs who specifically said, we will take this player from you. And you can read it all on the various outlets that publish the Canadian Press's work. But what it seems to feel like is Insigne said, no, I want my money. So TFC, from the sounds of it, Wheels, are going into the idea of, well, then stay home or sit on the bench. And that's certainly a possibility for them, whether they buy him out or they pay him to watch from the touchline. It's not new because the drama is exhausting and we will all celebrate with champagne when it finally ends someday. But we do need to go into the weeds a bit and say, okay, well, now there's tangible things here. Clubs that said, we'll go take him, whether it's in Turkey, whether it's Valencia, for example, or Venezia, excuse me, very different, and Valladolid, I believe. But look, I know you've been very clear and you've been very astute in your analysis on this file in the past, but let's talk about it. Is the move for Toronto FC to say, okay, if you're going to hold this hostage, stay home?
Guys, I've reported on this the last 3 weeks on the show, and I've sounded like a broken record. This is a buyout negotiation. This is what has been playing out for the last 3 weeks, where Lorenzo Insigne expects to get paid a certain amount in terms of a buyout to see him leave, and Toronto FC have settled on their number, and they're not willing to budge on that number. I've been clear on this for weeks now, and that still is the case. What's new here is the very public approach that Toronto FC is taking in order to potentially pressure Insigne to leave. That's why these clubs are being thrown out there. That's why the threat of sitting the player. This is a very different tactic by Toronto FC because before, ever since he's been here, despite his lack of performance and all the nonsense off the field as well, they played nice and they backed the player. And that is done now. All cards are on the table when it comes to that. As far as these 3 clubs are concerned, I'm not of the understanding that there's a transfer fee that would be paid by any of these clubs by these players. These are clubs that would be willing to sign him for a number contingent on the buyout being made, which then would provide kickbacks to the player. So it's not as if a player is going to come in and assume and continue paying Lorenzo Insigne a ridiculous salary. It was all contingent on him taking the buyout. And with windows closing across Europe, this is more of a summer venture, more so than anything else. I do find it a little bit misleading when the public sentiment or the sentiment that's being shared publicly is that they have like all these other designated players or options lined up, and that's why they need Insigne out now. That's not my understanding of the situation. They want Insigne out now because he's a detriment to the team. He's a cloud hanging over them. His training, work ethic, and focus simply isn't on point, not only for a designated player, but unbecoming of a player that wants to be part of any kind of team and squad. And that's why I think they're at a point where we cannot go forward with this player. I've said all along, I've said this for weeks now, I believe the plan was to buy out Insigne and then go out in the window in the summer and then go and try to attract a designated player and bring him in. So I think that this sort of posturing tries to, take the pressure off Toronto FC a little bit and put on the players, because right now, it's not just Insigne is not the only issue here, Adam. The fact that there are too many players on this squad that haven't had trade value. They haven't been able to move players in the market because players are being paid far too much for the players that they are. And that exodus of players is going to have to play out over the course of this season into next summer, where a number of high earners are out of contract. I've said this all along. I'll continue to say it. This is a reset, a rebuild. It's not about this season. It's about 2026. And if they've gone out and signed a Norwegian striker on loan with an obligation to buy, that is with eyes of having a little bit more flexibility next summer or ahead of next season. So you go in and bring in a number 10 DP in the summer. You bring in another potential marquee player next winter as well, and then start putting the pieces back together. Insigne is a huge chip in all of this, but he's not the only chip. Now we'll see what the reaction from Lorenzo Insigne and his camp are when it comes. Clearly, he won't like this kind of posturing, but he's in a position of strength because he wants his money, and if TFC are willing to pay him what he believes that number is that they should be paying him, I see no reason why Insigne wouldn't leave as soon as possible. But it's a staring match right now. Who's going to blink first? We will see about that.
And this is the interesting aspect of it, isn't it, Ollie? Because if this was a coach, and certainly Red supporters understand that, you say, goodbye, sacked. They still get their money, but they're gone. You move on. And then there's obviously not the salary cap permutations quite like this one has. I'm understanding there's levels with MLS roster rules and DPs, et cetera. It's not about that. But Lorenzo Insigne signed a contract for a certain amount of years for a certain dollar number. There is absolutely no reason for him from a capitalistic, strictly contract-based. Why would he leave if he wants to sit in his penthouse or rent out the entirety of Hotel X and just enjoy the Toronto summer? That's his right. He signed the contract. But why Red supporters would rightfully be upset is at this point, they're trying to move him, and obviously they're not offering him the number that he wants to go away quietly. But you don't blame them necessarily if they feel like he's kind of holding the club hostage at the minute.
Yeah, but like we knew all of this months ago. Like none of this is a new development, and it's the club's job to deal with it. And like this to me is a fairly naked attempt by the club to, number one, put pressure on Insigne to accept whatever that is they're offering him, or to come down from his position in terms of a buyout. And two, to somewhat blame him for the fact that a week out from the new MLS season, TFC's transfer business has been very, very limited to currently one and what sounds like maybe two loans for a team that lost 19 games out of 34 last season, which supporters are rightly unhappy about the lack of change that's occurred. So like when you look at these clubs that have been named now, two are going to get relegated in all likelihood from Serie A and La Liga. And the other one is looking over their shoulder in a much less appealing league in Turkey. So why would Insigne take any of those? Like, you know, I don't really understand, you know, why they would consider he would see that as a great pathway out of the club. And then again, like this is something that we've been saying since last season, that no one is going to bail them out here. They are going to have to buy this player out, and they're probably going to have to buy him out to the large extent of his contract. So you knew that a long time ago. I think that was fairly obvious a long time ago. If you've allowed that to kind of ruin your offseason and sidetrack it in terms of what you're able to do to start changing the squad and rebuilding this team, that's on you. However you feel about Insigne sitting on the money, like he works for a multi-billion-dollar organization in MLSE and he signed a contract. Like I don't know that you can really blame him on that front, and the club has to take responsibility for how this is panned out.
And as for the training side of things, like, you know, my understanding is he's been training poorly, but he's showing up. He's not doing anything that would be breach of contract, right? So it's not as if they can hang that on him. So I do think that this is a little bit of move of desperation. Like, I think that both sides would love to go each other's way, but both want it to be on their terms. So who's willing to bend or blink first? That's what it comes down to. But Ollie's right. Like, this is Toronto FC's responsibility, and it's not just the Insigne contractor situation that's hampered them in this window. It's the entire squad build and their financial commitments elsewhere, the lack of sellable assets. That's what's put them in this position inevitably.
All right. It is obviously not a lovey-dovey time between Lorenzo Insigne and Toronto FC. But it's Valentine's Day, so let's spread the love. Listen, there's a lot of great saints. Gareth and I, we're partial to Saint David. That's known. That's not a secret. Saint Valentine, fantastic. Saint Patrick, sounded like a good dude. Great time. Ollie's favorite saint, a little more lesser known. Saint
Hubert.
The late Bishop of Westminster, I believe. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to spread the love, gentlemen. So we come up with the question of this. Who is your crush in the world of Canada soccer? Who would you love to give a Valentine's Day card to? And I will begin by saying, and I'm really sorry if I'm taking one of yours. It would be kind of hilarious, though. I'm going to need to write about 20 to 30 Valentine's Day cards to the foot soldiers and the traveling members of the Barton Street Battalion who showed up away from home in the Concacaf Champions Cup. It was so incredibly cool to see and hear them on the broadcast, and they deserve all of the love. Win, lose, or draw, those are trips that they'll never forget, and that's part of the culture we're trying to build. So to you, every single one of those traveling parties, a happy Valentine's Day and safe travels home. Oliver Platt, to you.
I thought you were going to pick Adam the new Atletico Ottawa kit because I saw from the photos that although it is obviously striped, the back of it is entirely white and you will be able to read the numbers this year. So that's a big win for you on commentary. I'm going to go with another. It is a nice kit. I'm going to go with another one, though, as my crush in Canada soccer this year, which is somewhat undoing past mistakes, I think. It's the CF Montreal kit. And finally, the team that had the best, or one of the best, and certainly one of the most striking color schemes in Major League Soccer, the blue and black stripes, have decided to go back to the blue and black stripes, which I don't think they ever should have gone away from. So TFC seem to be deciding that a red kit is a good idea this year as well. So I'm happy to see some past mistakes being undone with the return of red and the blue and black.
Gareth Wheeler, I feel like this will be a long list. You're a very loving person.
All right.
People don't know that about you.
I do. Valentine's Day, I try to give out a Valentine when I was in school to every kid in the class because everyone needs a little bit of love on a day like today. So I have a lot of Valentines to hang out here. So let's start off on theme and on point with what Oliver Platt just said. And the color red. It's all about Valentine's Day. It's good to see Toronto FC with a red home kit for this upcoming season. I'd also like to give Valentine to those who wear short sleeves in sub-zero temperatures, that it was a proper football attire, and those who still wear copas as well. They're the best football boot out there. To Moise Bombito, the eraser. Time and space aren't a thing for the man. He is my favorite player to watch right now. To the Halifax Wanderers schedule reveal. Spot on. The pop culture references. You nailed it. I want to give a Valentine to Jesse Marsh and his commitment to wearing jeans and high tops. Denims and Nikes are his thing, and he will not get rid of them. I love that commitment. Another match made in heaven is Callum Irving and the Eagle in Vancouver. Hercules. It always flies away, but Callum knows that it'll always come back. My references to Pat Benatar and Christopher Cross on last night's broadcast, that deserves a Valentine, absolutely. CF Montreal's off-season, Valentine's worthy. It's been excellent. Tommy Wheeldon Jr.'s poor boy hat, Valentine. Kyle Becker and his newfound love of meditation and mindfulness. All referees in the Canadian Premier League, thank you. Schaffelberg's commitment to the mullet, even though mullets these days, it's admirable. Hair on the west coast of this country, namely James Merriman and Ashton Goppy, is excellent. Shout out to those who can't grow hair. Geyser, Smirniotis, Big Phil, Laurent, and now Jesper Sorensen. I feel you, boys. The legend of Vanni Sartini. I'm putting a Valentine in the mail. I hope it gets to him. We love you and miss you, Vanni. The 2000 Gold Cup winners, as well as the 2020 Olympic winning team. I'll send them a Valentine each and every year. David's next contract. I'd love to give a heart to all the zeros that have been added to that paycheck. Vanessa Gilles headed goal. We saw so many. It's the best attacking option for the Canadian women. Give a Valentine there. Jordan Wilson for the dinner he owes me because he gets all of his bets wrong. Those who try to build the game in this country and not tear it down, to transfer rumor aggregators, especially in this country. I love not following you. Volunteers and builders and those behind the scenes in this country that make the game of soccer tick, not bringing politics into the equation. You're my real Valentine. And long live Canadians in soccer. True, North, strong, and free. I love you all.
That was maybe the best thing you have done in 7 years. The humor, the thoroughness, and then sliding a compliment and a Valentine to yourself in the middle of it was excellent, Gareth Wheeler.
Deserved one.
I'm almost disappointed that the show doesn't end on that note. Oliver Platt, you are the only voice amongst the three of us who did not get to weigh in on camera last night. So as is tradition, you get the first word. The Cavs come up just short, down a man, throwing everything, including Marco Carducci at Pumas at the end, but it was just a little bit too little, too late after that Martinez brace.
It was, and obviously, a lot to like about Cavalry over these two legs, and a lot that they can take, plenty of pride out of, I think, in the way they've performed here and the way they continue to perform since the end of last season. It's as good a moment as this club has ever been in. But you also can't help but feel, I think, like 11 against 11, that was there for them. That Pumas team, I think, was in a bit of trouble going into, or just before halftime, before that red card, which obviously completely changes the complexion of that game. So I feel for Jay Herdman, it happens. It's not on him, and I'm sure they'll put an arm around him. And I think he's going to be a very exciting player to watch in the Canadian Premier League this season. But just playing with 10 men at altitude, away from home, against a team like that made the task, I think, so much more difficult and a lot different than it had been in that first half, where although Pumas had all of the ball and dominated, I think Cavalry were largely restricting them to shots from distance, to crosses, to some pretty hopeful stuff, to be honest, up until that penalty kick. So, you see the Ali Musi chance at the end. You see a couple of the chances they had on set pieces at the end that could have snuck in and, still had them in extra time. And you just think, what would that have looked like in the second half if it had been 11 on 11? But you have to give them a lot of credit to come out of their preseason, to have players, I think, who weren't fully fit and were playing through injuries. When you look at the likes of Charlie Trafford, Shome, I think, picked something up as well. And to not even really get a home game in this competition, at home at ATCO Fields, they did a remarkable job to be this close to going through to the round of 16.
And of course, the Carducci save. Maël Henry steps back onto the pitch. He seems to be just about fully healed up from his injury to add to that compliment. Wheels, it's not sober second thoughts because you were very clear and very concise on how you felt yesterday. But with the benefit of time and maybe something maybe you discovered or thought more about since going off air last night.
Yeah, we discussed how valiant of an effort it was and how competitive Cavalry were over two legs. Look, we're not trying to recreate history here in terms of our analysis, but I do think that it needs to be level set a little bit. In the first half of play, penalty before the sending off, I mean, Cavalry didn't have a shot. It was one-way traffic. It was 14-0. So clearly Pumas was the side on the ascendancy, but Cavalry were doing a great job just hanging around, getting stuck in. And the reason why we kind of claim that it's a disappointment for Cavalry, it just didn't look like Pumas were going to score 11v11, did it? Like everything was a shot from distance. Everything was a searching cross. There were a couple opportunities where players did find some room in between the gaps, but there was nothing particularly threatening that would have made Cavalry nervous heading into the second half. And as the pressure mounted, I think it would have put Cavalry in a really good position to go on and counterattack with much more effectiveness and efficiency in the second half. So I'm not changing the sound of my tune, but I do think that it's a point that needed to be made about how dominant Pumas were in the first half, but how Cavalry were doing a really good job in controlling that. They were up for this fight. Honestly, Adam, the mentality was right. The game plan was right. The pragmatic nature was spot on, and they put themselves right in the mix. And that's something that you can't take away from this group. They were right in it to the very end against a top four team in Liga MX. And that is something to be proud of, no matter what the end result actually was.
Well, now that we know that they're both done and the Canadian hopes remain on the shoulders of Vancouver Whitecaps, who begin next Thursday in Costa Rica, we can kind of look and compare and contrast. And it's always an impossible task to say apples and apples because of the run of form, the players available, the different situations going in with the team. Monterrey is full of hope and desire. Sergio Ramos is about to debut for the club. Pumas, they're still trying to sack their manager. There's just the you could not have polar opposite feelings around the clubs that the CPL sides faced. And yet, and I think, Gareth, in large part to what you just illustrated, the fact that Cavalry were a bit more pragmatic, that they were in until the very end, leaves us all with different feelings from the tie, certainly with this being Cavalry's first trip to Mexico. But with it done, and you reflect and you look back and you analyze, do you feel differently about Cavalry and Forge's 2025 prospects after these ties with the performances? Has much changed? Is it too early? Where are you landing here? Because it feels like the optimism is there with the Cavs. There's a bit more disappointment and not pessimism with Forge, but the feeling and the vibes are truly different.
Yeah, that's because Bobby Smirniotis refuses to change the way that Forge plays when they play cup competitions like this. I think that they played a little bit more pragmatic in nature, then maybe they could have provided a little bit more of a stiffer test. And look, it's hard to analyze and assess Forge against Monterrey. One, because Monterrey is an elite side. I think that they're much better than Pumas are. I don't think there's any debate about that. But also they played the first leg at home where they could have had an advantage. They played it on an ice rink. Like, how do you assess what you saw in that game? And the fact that Forge brought in 5 or 6 new players into the mix as well. It's just going to be a little bit of a different looking team. So I don't think that in any way, shape, or form, these 2 games in February will have an impact on what we see from Forge going forward. If you have questions about Forge, I think those same questions persist. Depth at center back and whether Brian Wright is going to be the true answer at the number 9 position. Other than that, this Forge team will be competitive throughout, both in the Canadian Championship as well as the Canadian Premier League. And for Cavalry, very much a similar feeling. This team is deep. They're good. They kept the core group of this team together. They're a little bit older in profile. I still think that they need to get a little bit younger. I still think that they need at least one more center back in order to make it through what is a very arduous Canadian Premier League and Canadian Championship season. And I think both these sides will be right near the top of the Canadian Premier League and be able to potentially go on a Canadian Championship Cup run. That's especially the case with Cavalry having beat the Vancouver Whitecaps in a game last year. This tie will go a long way to giving them experience to go through and navigate what looks to be the weaker side of the draw in the Canadian Championship as well. So yeah, I nothing's really changed for me. The questions I had before still exist, and I'm still as optimistic about both teams as I was heading in.
Oliver Platt.
Cavalry is still the better side for me right now. So I wouldn't say that that's changed based on these performances, because obviously it was the case at the end of last season when Cavalry were dominant in the CPL playoffs. Look, with Forge, I think they've done a lot of eye-catching business, obviously. That has been a lot of the talk over the course of the off-season, but you have to also bear in mind that the players that are coming in are replacing players that are going out, like Daniel Para and Garvin Matusala and Benny Badibanga, who have been stars in this league. And so how much they've actually moved the needle forwards, I think, really kind of depends on a couple of things. It depends on Brian Wright, who obviously is a difference to what they had last season at centre forwards and how he performs. And then I think it depends on how they integrate some of the guys that maybe we didn't even see that much across the course of this tie. You know, there's different players that have come in late that maybe weren't ready to play a huge part here. There's still players like Eliman Cisse, Maliko Olabi-Belawu, who could come back and strengthen this group. There's an interesting group of like 17 to 21-year-olds, I think, that the Forge have this year as well, and what kind of impact are they going to make? But right now, you know, I think Cavalry starting 11 squads, they look the stronger side to me, and my understanding is that they were still in trying to get Dan Klomp back right until the ends there when he signed in Belgium, so there should still be some flexibility in terms of their roster to add to that group as well.
Yeah, just the one thing on Forge that you mentioned, I just want to jump in really. Sorry, Adam. Just on Forge, I think they have the potential to be deeper than they were last season, maybe even the season before, based on some of these names that have come in. Ben Payton, I can't wait to see how he plays. Cato in the midfield looks a tidy little player. We didn't see him on the field. Eliman Cisse. So I think they have a lot more strength in terms of numbers. In Cavalry, I know it kind of blends into our next conversation, but trying to keep hold of Tobias Warschewski as long as you can is paramount for this club. And if they end up losing a player like that, then perhaps the way that we look at them changes to a certain degree.
Yeah, Wheels, you're exactly right. So let's get the forks and knives in here and just cut into this meaty topic of Tobias Warschewski. Look, there's always going to be the difference between leg one and leg two when you know that you're going to bunker down and sit behind the ball. So Warschewski, while he was playing more as like that false number 9 last night, so he in theory is going to get involved more in the midfield. They were defending for their lives because they knew that's what they had to do. So no, there was no Tobias Warschewski masterclass. He didn't have his moment quite like he did in leg one. And Ollie, what I find ironic about these two Goliaths of the Canadian Premier League, Cavalry and Forge, you either have Forge winning the title and Cavalry having the league MVP and Dan Klomp. It swaps last year, Borges wins, Cavalry wins the title. So like these guys are neck and neck always. But with you being so high on Cavalry as the better team right now, would you also be willing to say they have the best player in the CPL in Warschewski?
Yeah, I think he is the best player in the CPL, and I think that's a big difference between the two clubs right now, is just what this guy can do as a centre forward. And I'm glad we've picked this clip because, like, I watched Cavalry's last 3 games of the season in the stadium last season. I was in Winnipeg at the end of the regular season.
Humble brag,
2 playoff games. No, I say that for a reason, because sometimes I do think, and we all know this, like, you do see different things when you're there compared to when you're watching off a screen, and we'd all love to be on location for every single game. I've never seen a player like as individually dominant as he was in that stretch at the end of last season. Like, and you look at that semi-final in Hamilton, you know, on Forges Fields against some of the best defensive players we've had in this league, Jonsson, Hajabrapor, Metsusela, that they couldn't handle him. They didn't know what to do with him. I haven't seen anything like that in the 6 years that we've been covering this league. So, you know, doing it over the course of a full season, although obviously he's coming off a Golden Boot campaign, is is a different thing. So we'll see how this season goes. But right now, I think he's the best player in the league, no doubt.
Yeah, I think he's taking that mantle, that title, from a former teammate of his, because I thought that over the past 2 seasons, Dan Klomp was the best player in the Canadian Premier League, and now Tobias Warschewski will wear the crown for now as long as he stays. By the way, I thought he was good last night against Pumas.
Second half,
I mean, there was no surprise. Well, not even that. There was no surprises this time, and they were on him with numbers. Every time he was on the ball, there'd be 2 players all over him. He was trying to draw fouls. He was physical. He wasn't being put off. It was just a game where the attacking play or output just simply wasn't there for Cavalry regularly through this game, but I think he made his presence felt and shows that, maybe in a team where it isn't game 2 of their season, playing at altitude in Mexico City, maybe the context is different, that he can still be a real difference maker in any team.
It's time for the TonyBet topics. Presented by TonyBet, top picks as we head into another weekend. Oliver Platt and Gareth Wheeler, the advice on where to put your money if you haven't spent it all on your significant other, which you should be doing. For this one, let's start with English Premier League. Level on 41 points each. It is Manchester United and Newcastle, which famously, gentlemen, is all one word and not 2 words, as we discovered on our production meeting today. Man City, I beg your pardon. Man City minus 105, Newcastle plus 254. Who are you taking, Ollie?
Valentine to our friends at TonyBet, first of all. Thank you for your support, Canadian soccer. I'm going with Newcastle on this one. I like that. I think those odds seem a little wide out to me, so I'm going to take Newcastle.
Gareth, you agree?
City plays Real Madrid in the Champions League, the return leg. They can't defend. The team's going to be rotated because they have to go all out for the fixture midweek. So Newcastle, or the Newcastle team total over 1.5 at plus money, seems to be the best play you can make.
Gareth Wheeler, right back to you and to Germany next. In the Bundesliga, this match will be must watch. Bayer Leverkusen plus 200 at home. Bayern Munich still plus money, plus 129, or the draw at plus 270.
This is Leverkusen's last stand. They're 8 points back at Bayern Munich, who've been on flames in the Bundesliga, but Leverkusen beat Bayern Munich. They were down to 10 men. Bayern Munich, where Neuer was sent off earlier in that game in the season. It was 1-0, but Leverkusen hasn't lost to Bayern Munich in 5. Bayern still some work to do in the Champions League. That trip midweek to Celtic wasn't easy for them. So I think it's a good time to get on board with Leverkusen. I'll play it safe. Take them on the handicap plus 1/4 goal. That means if it ends in a draw, you win half your bet.
Oliver Platt.
Yeah, Leverkusen on the handicap sounds good to me. And I could also see goals between these two.
Alrighty, that's it for today. That's it for the week. What a week it was. And we're not slowing down on One Soccer, women's national team, and more Concacaf Champions Cup. Next week, you know where to find us. One Soccer, it's the place to be for everything footy in our great country.